Oh, yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather here tonight is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are gathered here today in this small, intimate gathering to celebrate the launch of Manitoba Women in Design by Marieke Gruwel. This event is, of course, possible, as is this book, thanks to our friends at the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. So thank you so much. I am keenly aware I am the least interesting person who will be speaking from behind this podium, so I will try to wrap this up fairly quickly. Just a few brief housekeeping notes before we begin. There will be a presentation that will take place here, after which there'll be an opportunity for you all to ask questions. If you're one of the folks located here, please just put up your hand and I'll wander over with this microphone. It's not because we don't believe you can't speak loudly, it's just to ensure that those watching at home can actually hear your question. And if you are one of those people watching at home, I'll duck down a little bit, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat and we will put them to the author as time permits. We are always thrilled to partner with the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation on their books because they are books that not only cause us to reevaluate the built environment around us, but also to reevaluate community. And this is one of those books that does that impeccably. It tells the story of women's contributions to Manitoba's built environment during the 20th century. And it's a beautifully put together book, incredibly informative and full of rich and surprising details. We are thrilled to have it on our shelves. I will have some exciting notes for you at the end of this event about how you too can get a signed copy of this book, so please do stay tuned for that. But right now it's my great pleasure to introduce the author of this book. You are correct. And you will have another opportunity to introduce her in just a moment, or applaud for her. I will be introducing her. Marieke Gruwel is an art and architectural historian who lives in Winnipeg with her partner, 2 cats, and a craft room full of yarn. She has a BA Honors in Art History from the University of Winnipeg and an MA in Art History from Concordia University. Gruwel has worked with the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation since 2015. She has published with WAF, Border Crossings, the Inuit Art Quarterly, and Routledge. Gruwel is a past recipient of the Mayor's Medal presented by the Mayor of Winnipeg and the University of Winnipeg. Please join me in giving a boisterous round of applause to Marieke Gruwel. There's a brief technological pause.
That's my niece, so it's okay.
And you're good to go.
Excellent. Wow, I'm shocked by how many there are of you, and I just can't thank you enough for joining me today and joining the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation for the launch of our latest publication, Manitoba Women in Design. I've been coming to McNally since I was a kid, so it really is a privilege to be here tonight with you all on this side of the event. So thank you to John and everyone at McNally for making this happen. Manitoba Women in Design is the result of a larger project that aims to document women's contributions to Manitoba's built environment during the 20th century. It all started when I stumbled across photographs of Elizabeth Pilcher in a donation of records pertaining to the architectural firm Green Blankstein Russell and Associates, also known as GBR. Pilcher was photographed multiple times with Cecil Blankstein, one of the firm's principals. This includes a photograph of her being greeted by Blankstein at the airport, which you can see on the slide here. I couldn't help but ask, what made her so important that they documented her arrival in Winnipeg and that Blankstein went to meet her on the tarmac? Thankfully, there was some information about her in the GBR records. I learned that Pilcher was from Australia and studied architecture at the University of Sydney. She also had postgraduate diplomas in architecture and planning from the University of Edinburgh and Harvard. At Harvard, she studied under Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus School. So I asked myself, if no one knew who Elizabeth Pilcher was, an architect and planner who studied and worked around the world, including with Walter Gropius, a pretty big deal, and somehow ended up working here in Winnipeg, how many more women architects do we not know about? And so I decided to try to find out. Little did I know that this would take me on a roughly 8-year research journey, resulting in an MA thesis on the subject, an oral history project, the creation of the Manitoba Women in Design online database, and of course, finally, this book. This project grew from documenting the first women architects who studied and or worked in Manitoba to also documenting early women interior designers, landscape architects, planners, and engineers who had ties to this province. This book would not have been possible without the support and contributions of so many people. Thank you to Susan Algie, who supported and championed this project for all these years, maybe too many years. Thank you to Susan McLennan, who did a superb job editing the book. We had many conversations about grammar and spelling and word choice, and I loved every minute of them, so thank you. Thank you to Robin Shesterniak for Burdock's Design Studio for designing the book, which she just did such a fabulous job. I'm indebted to the generosity of so many women practitioners who took the time to talk with me, participate in oral histories, and review some of the text. Thank you. I hope I've done justice to your amazing contributions. I also want to thank the family members who trusted me with stories of your loved ones and shared material that is included in the pages of the book. Thank you to the many researchers and archivists who helped me along the way. This research was a very large undertaking, and I cannot stress enough how important our archival institutions are in making this kind of work possible. Thank you. Yes, exactly. And finally, a critical part of what made this research and publication possible. Thank you to the funders who supported the project financially, the City of Winnipeg, the Faculty of Architecture Endowment Fund at the University of Manitoba, the Landscape Architecture Canada Foundation, the Manitoba Association of Architects, the Province of Manitoba, and the Winnipeg Arts Council. I wouldn't be doing my job as the new Executive Director of the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation if I didn't say that we receive no operational funding, so we rely on project grants, sponsorships, and the generous support of donors, people like you, to do what we do. So thank you. Manitoba Women in Design is divided into 5 chapters: architecture, interior design, planning, landscape architecture, and engineering. During our time this evening, I would like to introduce you to a few of the women whose lives and careers are showcased in the book and speak a little bit about my research process. The well-known Canadian woman architect Blanche Lemko van Ginkel has argued that women entered the profession of architecture in Canada very slowly and with great difficulty. In 1960, women only made up 1.2% of registered architects in this country, the number only climbing to 6.6% by 1980. One of the women who was part of that 1.2% was Elizabeth Lord. In 1944, she became the first woman to register with the Manitoba Association of Architects. The photograph you see on the slide here was taken in 1955 by Hugh Allen for the Winnipeg Tribune. You can see Lord working at her drafting table, surrounded by maps, publications, and rolls of drawings. Standing around her are her 4 children. The photo accompanied an article titled "Elizabeth M. Lord Finds Architecture a Profession Women Can Practice at Home." Yeah. Lord graduated with a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Manitoba in 1939. Her early career included employment at Arthur Cubbage Architect, Green Blankstein Russell and Associates, and Moody Moore Architects. By 1953, she had established her own architectural practice, often working out of her home. A challenge I faced when researching Lord was documenting her design work, and this was a challenge I continued to encounter over the course of this project. My research was really an endeavor of following the breadcrumbs, and then there were these moments that I just got really, really lucky. And one of those lucky moments was connecting with two of Lord's granddaughters. They shared photos of Lord, information about her life and her career, her sketchbooks from university, and material about some of the projects that she designed. On the slide here, you can see two projects designed by Lord for her family. On the left is a house on Turnbull Drive in St. Norbert, and on the right is a family cottage that she designed. I only have these photos thanks to this lucky connection, and I can't thank Megan and Courtney enough for their help in this project. In 1971, Lord was interviewed by the Winnipeg Tribune and asked to reflect on her 25-year career as an architect. When asked if she had been successful, Lord responded, "Yes and no. Financially, no, but professionally, yes. I set a landmark for women architects in Manitoba." When you hopefully read the book, you'll come to see how she did exactly that. A study by two scholars, Anne-Marie Adams and Peter Tancred, revealed that between 1920 and 1960, the University of Manitoba had the highest number of women graduates who went on to become registered architects in the country, totaling 1/3 of Canadian educated women registrants of this time. Not all these women stayed in Manitoba. For example, U of M graduates Joy Ann Sundin and Adalou Watson went on to become the first two women to register with the Saskatchewan Association of Architects in 1950 and 1951, respectively. In spring 1947, the Winnipeg Tribune published an image of Sundin and Watson, along with another woman student, Doris Constant Walford. You can see it on the slide here. The caption read, "The supremacy of the male has again been threatened. For the first time on the campus of the University of Manitoba, women have taken up surveying. Pictured are 3 young women of first-year architecture who have invaded this supposedly masculine field." It was Sadie Eklund Wallace who, in 1932, became the first woman to graduate with a degree in architecture from the University of Manitoba. In the university's Brown and Gold yearbook, Wallace was described as a personable young lady who hummed and smiled her way through 3 years of structural strength and drafting. One of Wallace's 2 known projects in Winnipeg dates to 1945, when she was credited for the design of the Kensington Beauty Salon, located on the 2nd floor of the Hertig building on Portage Avenue. The salon was advertised as being planned for efficiency and hygiene, and celebrated for its ultra-modern fixtures. Wallace never registered as an architect in Manitoba, and she wasn't alone. Joan Harland wanted to be an architect. So when the time came for her to enroll in university in the early 1930s, she ordered the course catalog from McGill University. When it came in the mail, Harland found the words "No Women" written clearly underneath the architecture heading. It was not until 1939 that McGill admitted its first woman into its architecture program. Now, with this idea that women did not study architecture, Harland enrolled instead at the University of Manitoba to study science. In her second year, she met a woman who actually was studying architecture, and so she promptly switched to the program. Harland graduated in 1938 with the gold medal in her class, but had a difficult time finding a job in the field. At an interview at a Winnipeg firm, Harland was told that if she enrolled in a secretarial course, she would make a good secretary in an architecture office. Not long after, though, she was offered a job teaching at the University of Manitoba's School of Architecture. This coincided with the time that the school decided to establish a diploma course in interior decorating, which was the first of its kind in Canada. In 1948, the Department of Interior Decorating was changed to the Department of Interior Design, and the 3-year diploma became a 4-year bachelor's degree, again the first of its kind in the country. The Bachelor of Interior Design was not only the first of its kind in Canada, it was also recognized as one of the top programs in North America. The curriculum was modern and closely allied with architecture. This was unique at the time, as many schools were offering interior design through fine arts or home economic streams. And it was Harland who really led the program forward and educated a generation of interior designers who advanced the field across the continent. The firm GBR was notable for hiring women interior designers and tasking them to work on some of their most celebrated projects. Debbie Lexier worked on the Elizabeth Defoe Library at the University of Manitoba, a modernist design that marked a significant break from the campus's earlier collegiate-style buildings. Marjorie Pritchard was responsible for the interior design of Winnipeg's International Airport Terminal, sadly no longer with us, but often recognized as one of Canada's finest examples of mid-century modern architecture. Margaret Stinson led the interior design of Winnipeg's City Hall building, resulting in a stunning design that was celebrated in the press upon its opening. All three of these women were graduates of the U of M and were young professionals when they started working at GBR. It was GBR too who had offered Elizabeth Pilcher the position of head of their planning department. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, Pilcher received her Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Sydney in 1945. Her studies have been briefly interrupted when she was recruited by the United States government in the Army Service of Supply to work as a draftsman. In this role, Pilcher helped design prefabricated structures and drew invasion maps. 2 years later, she furthered her studies in architecture at Harvard University. There, she studied under famed modernist architect Walter Gropius as a, quote, special student, to which she was later quoted saying there was nothing that special about it. Pilcher was becoming increasingly interested in town planning and completed a 2-year postgraduate degree in the subject at the Edinburgh College of Art. After returning to Australia, Pilcher was quoted saying that her gender was constantly getting in the way of securing a good town planning position. It was around this time that she received the offer from GBR and made her way to Winnipeg. Pilcher's time here was brief, but it was certainly impactful. She was immediately thrown into several of GBR's most significant projects, including the Winnipeg International Airport Terminal. Pilcher was also tasked with traveling to Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington to research cooperative housing in preparation for a similar project being designed by GBR in Winnipeg. This directly connects Pilcher with the design of Willow Park, Canada's first permanent housing cooperative for families. I consulted newspaper articles extensively throughout my research. We are so lucky in Manitoba to have access to digitized newspaper archives through the public library and the Winnipeg Tribune Funds at the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections. I was quite surprised with how frequently Pilcher was featured in the local press. On this slide, you can see just 3 of the examples. There was one project in particular that received significant attention. In 1960, Pilcher was commissioned by then Progressive Conservative MP Laurier-Regnier to design an underground car park that could also act as a nuclear shelter. The proposal saw the car park extend from the Portage and Main intersection to the downtown Hudson's Bay building. A year later, Pilcher was interviewed by the local press again when Alderman Mark Dansker announced that he would be asking Winnipeg City Council to consider building the underground shelter. Pilcher argued that the project would solve some of the major issues facing the city, including its disintegrating downtown that was gradually being taken over by surface area parking lots. This was 1961. So far, I've talked a lot about women who worked in the private practice, but there were women in design fields who found work in the public sector as well. One of these women was Mary Rosalind Robertson. She earned a Bachelor in Architecture and a Master's in City Planning from the University of Manitoba in 1954 and 1962, respectively. Her early career included a position as an architect, then as an assistant planner with the Metro Planning Division. Robertson continued her career as a planner, ultimately climbing the ranks to become the first woman in Winnipeg to hold the title of Chief City Planner. She did this all while being a single parent. Evidence suggests that when Robertson left her position in the mid-1970s, she may have been the city's highest-ranking woman civil servant. She worked on major projects, including the Metropolitan Corporation of Greater Winnipeg's 1966 development plan. One of the privileges about writing this book was being able to talk to some of the women about their lives and careers. The Winnipeg Architecture Foundation has thankfully been conducting oral histories since the early 2000s. I was able to draw on this collection and also add to it with the help of training from the Oral History Center at the University of Winnipeg. These oral histories have been critical in addressing some of the major challenges I faced in my research, which included a lack of archival sources, issues regarding attribution, AKA who gets the design credit, and documenting contributions that were made outside the boundaries of professionalism. The chapter on landscape architecture is rich with information drawn from these oral histories, including past interviews with Cynthia Kohlmeyer, Lori Lamb Wagner, and Heather Cram. Their contributions to the landscapes of this province are tremendous. When Cynthia Kohlmeyer graduated with a Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Manitoba in 1977, she became the first woman to earn this degree from a Canadian institution. She collaborated often on projects with her husband, architect Steve Kohlmeyer. They played a significant role in the redevelopment of the Forks, including the design of the Forks Market Plaza, the canopy, and the historic port. Cynthia Kohlmeyer also conceived of the Wall Through Time and Prairie Garden at the Forks. Lori Lamb Wagner had always wanted to be an interior decorator, but that changed when she received the course calendar from the University of Manitoba and saw the programs offered in architecture and environmental studies. Lamb Wagner obtained her Bachelor of Environmental Studies in 1974, recalling that only a handful of the more than 100 students in the program were women. After graduating, she worked as a planner, and it was then that she developed an interest in landscape architecture. Lamb Wagner graduated with a Master of Landscape Architecture in 1982, and a handful of years later began working with her husband, landscape architect David Wagner. Together, they have worked on diverse projects from parks, skate parks, and playgrounds, over 100 of them, to animal habitats, golf courses, memorials, and private gardens. Another woman whose contributions can be found across this province is Heather Cram. In 1981, Gary Hilderman invited Cram to work in his Winnipeg-based office, now HTFC Planning and Design. Cram recalled that, quote, "The two understood each other right from the very first day, as he, like Cram, had started his studies in architecture before turning to landscape architecture." Cram was a key figure in pushing the boundaries of the landscape architecture profession in Manitoba and across Canada. She has also demonstrated a strong commitment to community during her career. A major feat was her key role in the founding of the Winnipeg Art Council's public art program, which has done so much to enrich this city. And if you love our public art, now is the time to say it loudly and make sure that the city hears you. The final chapter in the book deals with the engineering profession, a profession very well known for being dominated by men. The Faculty of Engineering at the University of Manitoba was founded in 1907, but it was several decades later that Edna G.M. Russell was the first woman to graduate. Russell had obtained her Bachelor of Architecture and a Master of Architecture from the school in 1938 and 1942, followed by a Bachelor of Civil Engineering in 1946. The text accompanying her graduation photo read in part, quote, "Edna is the only known member of the opposite sex to tackle this heavy course in civil engineering." Russell never registered as an engineer in Manitoba, and by 1954, she had left the province. It was 1960 when the U of M saw its next woman graduate in engineering, Wendy Gaunt. Gaunt was interviewed by the Winnipeg Tribune, and the article began with the quote, "I'm getting tired of explaining why I like engineering." The author of the article wrote, "Wendy likes all aspects of her engineering course and couldn't explain why she took it. Did she like the boys?" To this question, Gaunt responded, "That sounds a little flippant, but I do like them." In 1959, Mink Kuiper became the 1,025th active member of the Association of Professional Engineers of Manitoba and its first woman registrant. She had studied in the Netherlands and came to Canada with her husband, who was also an engineer. She was surprised to learn that she was the association's first woman registrant. Engineer Judith Weitzman also came to Winnipeg with education from overseas. She, like Kuiper, was surprised to learn that there were so few women engineers in Canada. Weitzman faced several barriers when entering the profession here in Manitoba. Of the process, she said, "When we first came here, never mind that I was an engineer, people couldn't understand why my husband sent me to work. They sort of said, well, a middle-class professional should not make his poor wife work. She's supposed to be at home waiting for hubby to come home for supper. They just couldn't understand that I wanted to work, that I had a chosen profession which I wanted to use." Despite these obstacles, Weitzman found work in Winnipeg, first with an architecture firm and then an engineering firm. She ultimately went on to establish Weitzman and Associates Consulting Engineers in 1959 with her husband. Over her impressive decades-long career, Weitzman worked on a large variety of projects, from schools, apartments, and synagogues to industrial buildings and airplane hangars. Weitzman and the women you've heard about tonight are just some of the women that are showcased in the book. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and celebrating the contributions made by these impressive women. There are so many more women whose contributions are not documented yet. And it is my hope that you read this book, that when you read this book, you remember that this is only one part of the story. There are so many more stories yet to be heard. Thank you.
And there is no time for questions as I emerge from behind the screen. If you are located here, please just feel free to put up your hand and I'll rush over to you. And if you are watching on YouTube, just write your questions in the chat. Is there any question to start?
I actually don't really have a question. I just want to say this is such a remarkable book and remarkable research you've done, and it's just so unbelievably valuable for everyone in Manitoba to hear this. It instantly reminds me of that astronaut movie Hidden Figures, about women we didn't know about who were in the, you know, the moon, the NASA exploration business, or Henrietta Lacks, who made such a huge difference to science and all of our lives, but we've never heard of her, most of us, until someone bothered to do the research and write a book about her. So all of these women, I haven't heard about them, I haven't heard these stories, and yet they left their mark on Manitoba, and now you've told us all about them, and I think that's just extraordinarily special and awesome. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Clyde.
What is the current status of women taking architecture at the universities?
That is a great question. I don't know the statistics off my head, and they might be a couple years out of date. But for the most part, you know, women in architecture programs in universities outnumber men. So we're looking at like figures like 60, 70%, and yet they still only are about 30% of registered architects in Canada. So we still have a lot of work to do.
What seems to be the barrier from them going to school to actually getting into the business?
That is a great question. Early on, I'd say even to start from the beginning, a barrier to even getting into school was, well, of course, not being even allowed to attend. And then, of course, how they were counseled in high school. In my research, I did find actually a number of articles dealing with this subject about how girls were not you know, counseled in high school to be like, hey, this is an option for you. And then in terms of when it comes to entering the profession, you know, I think there are many barriers. Architecture specifically, all the fields are very different, so it's hard to speak to all of them as a whole. But architecture specifically, I think, is a very demanding job, and still to this day, family life, you know, makes that difficult. And of course, back then, sexism too, you know, Harlan's experience being like, well, you would, you know, be a good secretary with your architecture degree. So, yeah.
All right, now we'll extend another offer of questions. Yes. Congratulations, Marieke. This is an amazing achievement. I remember that exhibition at the small offices of the Architecture Foundation some years ago.
Yes.
Where the photographs of women were up against archival boxes.
Yes.
It was really quite wonderful. My students really enjoyed it. But I just wanted to kind of draw you out a little bit more about archives, because it seems to me that we are in the middle of an absolute crisis I know that at the University of Manitoba Archives Special Collections, for example, there is literally no more room to take anything. There's a total moratorium on taking in papers and documents. I know that the WAF has done a very good job. Well, I mean, I guess it's Susan's house,
Yes.
Wherever, but it's really kind of incredible that there isn't any institution that is capable of collecting these archives, these archival sources that you depended on.
Yeah.
To some extent, because then there's also the interviews, because there aren't the archives, and archives are being thrown out into dumpsters all the time. I know that Serena had that experience when she was working on her book on Winnipeg Modern.
Yeah.
We just threw everything out, the last week or whatever. So I just wondered if you could just reflect on that a little bit and maybe make some suggestions. And you've made a suggestion already about about public art, which we should all be aware of as well, but maybe on this count as well.
Thank you so much. I agree 100%. We are in a state of crisis, I think, with our archives, and there is so much. I applaud Susan Algie for taking these archives in, and we had a wonderful archivist for a while, Laura Elsie Geringer, who's I think in the back there, who created finding aids and arranged them and digitized them, and we're doing the best we can to preserve them. But we're not an archival institution, right? But it very much so is it's you or the garbage type of situation, and and I don't know, I know there's an archivist with his hand up, maybe he wants to add a comment here to this question, but I think we need obviously better funding for starters, but it goes so much deeper. Ian, do you have any?
Just to say that the gender dynamic you've talked about in architecture, landscape architecture, engineering, extends to the profession of archival studies.
True, yes, that is a good point. And of course, archives are known for erasing women's history or not even collecting it when they could collect it. So that's an issue too. And then history being the next step of erasing women's contributions as well. Yeah. Thank you, Ian.
Congratulations on your book, and I'm very looking forward to reading it. So can you please share with us that, throughout the journey of writing the book, what is the one thing that you enjoy the most? And what is the one thing that you think you could change or improve?
Ooh, can I have 10 more years? Because I think, just meeting so many people and connecting with people and learning about their stories and their contributions. And I love archival research and working with a phenomenal team of people to make it happen. And I wish in a perfect world there would be even more women, but that's why I'm hoping someone takes this book and says, I want to do more research and more documentation happens. So thank you.
Hi, I'm wondering if maybe there were any holes in the archives and stuff that you wish you could have added to your book, but unfortunately couldn't due to the records not being there or in the bin.
Ooh, that is a great question. I mean, in a perfect world, like the archives would have been active in collecting these like the records of architecture firms or landscape firms or the work of interior designers, and so having just those available. I think drawings, a very tough thing has been connecting specific women with specific projects. I turn to newspaper articles a lot to be like, oh, well, it says they worked on this project, but I don't know exactly what they did. And so that would be a place where the archives would have been tremendously helpful. And just the visuals too, of course. Thank you.
I have a question this time. I have a question that'll sound maybe a bit provocative at first. I'll explain myself. And the question is, what is the point of having women architects? And what I mean by that is, here's a profession that was almost all male
Mhm.
up until the 1930s or 40s, and even still now male dominated. What, like, in researching the women you researched, did you read anything about them, read any interviews? Do you know anything about their work where they talked about, I feel like I made a difference as a woman designing this park, this house, this airport, this whatever. And not that all women are the same and would have the same point of view, but bring their experiences as women that might have been different from the experiences of men, for instance. Just wondering if you have any insight.
I'm going to try to tackle this question in two parts. The first part being, obviously these professions in architecture, the whole reason this book exists is, obviously women struggle to get into these professions. We're, underrepresented in these professions and still are. But I do want to highlight that women make contributions to the built environment outside of the boundaries of professionalism. Anne-Marie Adams and Peter Tancred have written about this. And it's important to broaden our understanding of who participates in the formation of the built environment, to acknowledge all those contributions. That's part of my answer. And then my second answer kind of, in a way, I guess, contradicts my first answer. But I don't think in many cases I came across anything where someone said, I designed this specifically because I am a woman. But there is a really great quote, and I'm just going to pull it from the book because it's right here, that I think sums this well. And it was our engineer Ruth Eden, and so she's talking about the engineering profession, but it applies to all. She says, for engineering to be the best profession that it can be, the membership needs to be representative of all society. And so we still have a very, very long way to go, of course.
Right. And are there any more questions? One final shot before we turn things, oh, yes.
I'm just going to follow up on Kai's question a little bit. So there are, in addition to women who see themselves as activists in the role of design, were there ever any instances you ran across at the universities that owned their past sexist behavior, that ever admitted any fault or were active in trying to remedy the obvious discrimination?
Not in my research, and I will say that is because I did end my research, somewhat in the 80s, following careers after that, of course. And I was, interested more in the early years of the different educational programs. So I didn't go too much before or too much after that, which I'm sure some institutions have been doing that since then. But at the time, no, there are even quotes from deans at the time saying that they're, in the 60s, that there were no issues at all. So.
We do have a question from one of our viewers watching online who asks, how can young professionals working in firms right now make sure their work done by women in the office doesn't get erased?
That's a great question. It certainly goes back to like the issue of attribution. So making sure that you're crediting everyone who's participating, which doesn't always happen. And then back to Oliver's question of, the state of archives right now, because in a perfect world, archives would be seeking these collections and preserving them, but they're doing the best that they can with such limited resources.
All right, so one more opportunity to ask questions. Yes.
I just want to say that I think most of us went into our professions thinking we were people. And we weren't worrying about whether we were male or female. We knew what we wanted to do and we went in as people.
Thank you.
All right. And if there are no further questions, I'll turn things over to our author this evening if you have any closing comments before I go over procedure.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and supporting this project and the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation. for those of you who don't know, we do lots of fun things. So make sure to check out our website, winnipegarchitecture.ca. And next week, we have our 13th annual Architecture and Design Film Festival running from Wednesday to Sunday. You can find the full program at adff.ca. There's some great films and events lined up, so please join us. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marieke. Thank you to all of you for your questions and for your attention this evening. We will be moving along to the signing portion of this evening, so I have one immediate instruction for you, and that is that we ask you to remain in place for just one moment while we safely transport Marieke over to the table into our cash desk. Once she is situated, I'll summon you over and then you can get books signed. We do have copies available at the signing table. We do have copies available at our central cash desk. Please do feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Please do remember to pay for the book. We're so enormously grateful to the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation for helping to publish this book and so many others that allow us to see our city in new ways, and so grateful that you could all join us tonight to help celebrate its emergence into the world. So please join me in giving a very warm and potentially raucous round of applause to Marieke Gruwel.